Sometimes work is not easy, and I'm not talking about the actual function that we're responsible for, the thing that we do. That comes with a whole bunch of varying degrees of difficulty, depending on what it is and lots of other things. What I am talking about is the environment in which we work in. Being a leader in any part of the organization isn't the easiest when you're surrounded by negative talk, negative feelings, negative leadership. Why does it need to have that tone to it, that experience? Now, positivity with intent, that could be the cure for you and for the culture that just wants to be meh. And we don't want to work in meh. We want to work in a place we want to work in that excites us, that is positive. My guest today wants us all to show up positive, and she's going to let us know how to do that. Hold on. Hi, welcome to Relationships at Work, the leadership guide to creating a workplace we love. I'm Russel, your communications nerd, leadership nerd as well. Couple of decades under my belt in both of those areas. But what's always kept me going, kept me inspired, kept me engaged is my curiosity. And that's sort of the engine of this show. How can we make the workplace better? Let's learn how to do that. This show is a great place to start. I want to first start by thanking everyone who's been such a strong supporter of the show. From those early days of 2022 to the recent passing of our 75th episode. Wow. I ask that you please continue to support and help the show grow, because I can't do it without you. Please share with someone you think would find it interesting, with a text, an email, or in one of those conversations we all have these days about the state of work. Thank you. I really, really appreciate that. Something else I really appreciated lately was the recent conversation I had with Rita Ernst, who's our guest on today's show. Something she said, there's lots in there to take away, to certainly help and think on, but there was one thing that I'm still marinating on. We are the culture we want. Now, she didn't say those exact words, but my guest did dig into this, and it made me realize something that I've long known and I felt, but maybe I didn't speak up enough about it. For a long time, I've heard, have I ever said it? I don't even know if I've said it, but I've certainly heard maybe people on this show or certainly leadership say that culture is modeled from the top. What executive does or doesn't do, the behaviors they support or ignore, that's the culture. I could not disagree with that more. I've come to believe that is actually completely wrong. And Rita goes into it quite a bit in the episode, but for me, it would tell you that you don't have agency or influence in your workplace or the kind of environment you want to have. It wouldn't explain the numerous subcultures that we create and that we're a part of. Because I know so many people, and you might be one of them, that absolutely loves their team culture, but doesn't love the culture of the organization. The executive has nothing to do with your team culture. So how can they model it? But that's where intent comes in. What kind of a workplace do we want to work in? And how are we going to be intentional about that? Not in a pretend way where we try to stay positive in a negative environment where we're masking, but rather an active participant in it. I've been thinking of my contributions over the years, good and bad, and sort of doing stock on, have I contributed to a negative environment? Have I fostered a positive one in the actions I take and the words that come out of my mouth? I know I can do better. We all can. So why don't we? Really loved my chat with Rita as she shows us how we can show positivity at work that matters to us and those around us. So let's get to Rita. And on the show today, we have Rita Ernst. And here is why she is Awesome. She is an organizational effectiveness consultant, which is a really good use for her organizational psychology master's degree. She's an executive coach, speaker, and author of Show Up Positive, a book on helping you take back your positivity, your happiness at work. She's also the owner of Ignite Your Extraordinary, whose mission is to ignite positivity at work to improve performance, culture, and personal well being. She's a former radio presenter and former adjunct professor of psychology and organizational behavior at McKendree University, and she has a meaty background in HR. Welcome, Rita.
Thank you for having me, Russell. I'm very excited to be with you today.
I am as well. And if nobody noticed the key word in that introduction, positivity is going to be a big part of our conversation today. Before we get into any of that, however, I have to ask you, Rita, the one question I ask all of my guests to start off, which is, what's your best or worst employee experience?
Well, I'm going to choose to talk about one of my best experiences because I think it's a great example of how we can show a positive for one another in the workplace. So this was maybe my second or third career move when I was in corporate America. And I was actually coming from a satellite location into headquarters. And all of a sudden there was a reorganization. We all love those, don't we? When you come thinking you're like on one team and you show up and something else changes. And so there was this mishmash of teams that were coming together. So, people were sort of just needing to find their footing a little bit. And you had intact work groups that were merging. So that's always a bit of the who's in, who's out, all of those vibes that you can get from the middle school cafeteria at work. That's no fun whatsoever. And the leader of this particular organization had a very strong opinion about the practice of organizational psychology in the business and the kind of effectiveness work that we should be doing. But the methodology of communication was kind of a struggle. And I noticed that I had some colleagues that he responded to differently than how he responded to me personally. And so I was really not enjoying the job. I was really questioning whether I should stay. And a lot of people were really unhappy with him as a leader. So there was a lot of behind the scenes kibitzing that was going on about all of his flaws and what people were struggling with. And I didn't want to feed into that. If I was going to stay, I needed to figure out how to make it work. That was what I knew. And so I went to my colleague, Jerry, and we had already started to form a bond and a friendship. And I said, hey, I'm noticing that when you are interacting with the boss, you are getting a very different response from him than when I am interacting. And what do you think that's about? What do you notice about me and when I'm interacting? And so she shared some things with me and gave me some feedback and gave me some ideas. And we developed this peer-to-peer coaching thing, which was mainly me getting to be the receiver, which is what made it such an amazing gift. But it's also what made it such a positive thing. I could have given up. I could have looked for another job. I could have just joined the bitch fest that was going on about this particular individual. And instead, I was having a conversation with him one time. We sat in cubicles, so you have like sort of high walls. And he was a short guy. So he was standing outside of my cubicle while we were having this conversation about him. And I didn't really know it until the end of it. And so, so you have that gulp moment. And I was like, okay, now you really got to go own it. So I actually, instead of avoiding it or letting it be this unsaid thing, I set up a meeting with him and said, hey, there's a lot of unhappiness and discontent, but I want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. I'm seeking coaching from others, but I want to collaborate and co-create with you. And what would that look like? And the beautiful thing about the story is, one, I had this amazing relationship with Jerry, who I still adore, and who taught me what it meant to be a mentor to others around you in the workplace and to really band together to do something that is positive in difficult circumstances. And then the second thing was, by the time I left, he was begging me to stay. He was just like, "Oh my gosh, you've come so far. I want you to stay." I left for reasons that were not really related to him whatsoever. But it was a beautiful moment to have known that had successfully navigated to that place. Still wasn't sure I wanted to work for him, but the fact that he saw my value on the team and was willing to express that to me made it extra rich. But what I want people to take away from the story is this idea of really finding strength and security and growth through your teammates. You don't have to be limited by your boss.
I love that story because so many will just either go talk to somebody else and just, like you said, a bitch fest, and immediately just complain and add negativity to the culture of the organization and perpetuate the myth, possibly, of this aura of bad leadership and so forth.
Yes.
Regardless if the person is, there needs to be an opportunity for letting them learn from their mistake. They might not, but they need the opportunity to. So you're a better person than I in some certain situations, but I respect that immensely because people just immediately look at culture as an other, as opposed to something that they're a part of and something they influence. So yeah, thank you so much for that. Speaking of, we're getting into positivity, which is, I love that you kind of turned that 180 into something that was positive. So speaking to the author that you are of Show Up Positive, how would you describe or define positivity in the workplace?
I just find positivity as living your authentic experience and being the master of that experience, using your agency to create that. So positivity isn't pretending that there aren't problems. It isn't pretending things are good when they are bad. It's not tapping down real emotions. People need to feel and they need to express their full set of emotions. The question you have to ask yourself is, am I getting trapped by my emotions? Am I telling myself, like in the story that I just shared, I could have told myself the story that this guy was never going to change, that it was just going to be miserable. And I could have allowed that to be the story that just fed my existence. And I chose to pick a different story instead. And so that's what I mean when it's positive. It wasn't that things were hunky-dory and beautiful and that, like I said, that I really loved working for him or felt really compelled to be in that team. But while I was there, I was contributing. I was raising my personal skill set. I wasn't allowing those circumstances to limit or define me. That's me showing up positive for myself, for the customers that I was serving, for my teammates. And so that's the differentiation that I think is so important for people to understand. There's a lot of information out there that would say positivity means never feeling negative. And we know that psychologically that's not helpful. You need the contrast. You need to understand the difference. And so for me, positivity is being forward focused versus negativity, which is being stuck in a situation.
And how does that feel for the individual who's having to, because not everybody is flick a switch positive. They're either impacts from home, impacts that they have to bring into work that is not easy to, push away from themselves. So how does it feel to turn that switch? I'm kind of asking, I guess, about the benefits of being that positive person.
Well, I think the benefit is we have some psychological conditions that are really important to us as human beings. One of them is that we like to be right. So if we are telling ourselves a story about how shitty everything is, then we are going to look for confirmational information about that so that we can be right. If we change that story to things are really crappy, but I am not going to allow the crap to hold me back, right? Then that's just the shift in the story. So we like to be right. So choose a right that fills your cup versus a right that depletes all of your energy and your will and your happiness. The second thing is that we do have this part of our brain that looks for information to confirm what our truth is, right? It's why we are so polarized in politics and other things and so hard to move people. Because once we've drawn a belief or conclusion, we just look to affirm that. So if my conclusion was this guy is a horrible boss and he's never going to change, and I just stayed stuck in that loop, that's all I would have seen. And it would have reaffirmed my discontent. But what would I get out of that? What would that really do to serve me? So that's what the flip the switch is. The flip the switch is really just knowing that and believing in your ability to create something. It may not be everything you want. I never got that job all the way to bright, but instead of having that deplete me every day, I took away some essential learnings that have made me better for where I am right now. I didn't let those circumstances limit what I could receive as long as I was in that situation. And, it's important, Russell, to understand that what we're talking about are not situations like the death of a loved one. When you're in true grief over things, that's a different thing. There's a whole grieving process that you need to do, and you should do that. But in other situations, you do have this ability to really use your agency to create what you want. I've always been a behavioral psychology person. I believe in the behaviorist theory, and that is that we have the ability to create what we want. And so that's the lens that I am bringing to this, but there's a lot of information to support that.
You mentioned off the top that to be positive, you can also be negative. But I'm kind of curious as well, are there levels of that positivity? Because it feels like more like a spectrum than a ones and zeros kind of situation. Because I've seen people that they're getting through the day and I'm like, oh, they're managing. Others, I'm like, could you dial it down a bit? Your positivity might be a little over the top. Am I wrong in missing that, or?
No, I think that could be very true for sure. I do see it as it's a continuum of emotions, but again, is your energy moving forward or is your energy pulling back? I mean, that's sort of the continuum. Like imagine magnets, right? It's that, you're on this, it's this push-pull thing. And we really want to be pulling forward. And so there's a story that I share in the book of a connection of mine on LinkedIn who worked at Middle Tennessee State on the board. He was on the board, and he put the snippet of one of their meetings up on LinkedIn as I was writing the book. And I was like, oh, I have to use this to talk about this idea that positivity can be about standing up, calling out the negative things, right? So he got in front of the board and he said, we're not living up to our diversity commitments. We're not graduating our Black and brown students at the same rates as we are, or we are not. I think there were like 20 teacher appointments that were made, and none of them were people of color. And he said, we've got to do better. We have a commitment to this. And so he's calling out, and he even calls them out for shutting the conversation down. You keep shutting this conversation down every time I raise it. But this is one of our core values that we say we stand for, and I'm not going to be quiet about it. And he happened to be a Black man. But, he could have been any color, any gender, any whatever. The fact was he was standing up. He was showing up positive for a value that this university said mattered and told students and told their stakeholders mattered. And he said, hey, we're not living to that commitment. And so you could say he was being negative, but I don't think he was being negative. I think he was being honest. I think he was standing in his truth in that moment, and it was a hard message to deliver. And so the guidance I always give to my clients is when you have those hard moments, when you've got to stand in your truth and you've got to say something that could feel like it's attacking or may not be very well received by the other person, you just check your intention. If your intention is to make that person feel bad, to make sure they feel pain because they're in the wrong, then you might have the wrong end of the stick. that may be a little bit too negative. But if your intention is to drive change, to activate people, but you've got to talk about the hard thing first, that's a good place to be. You can navigate from there.
Thanks for that clarity too, because coming into this, most people will see positivity and think, "Oh, it's just turning my frown upside down." Rita,
Yeah.
It's not standing up for what's right. It's not speaking to core values. It's not trying to shift the culture to where it should be rather than where it's entrenched. So, thank you for that clarity, because most won't look at it like that. Are there any other misconceptions around the positivity at work?
I think another huge misconception that's very much attached to this is the idea that you have to go along to get along. That in a culture, we just, if we're in a positive, happy culture, then you just let all these things roll off your back and you just go along to get along. And you can't survive that. People have to be true, mind, body, spirit alignment, right? We got to be true to who we are and what matters to us. And if we keep suppressing to go along and get along with others, then we can't be our full selves. Well, if we can't be our full selves at work, then we cannot have our ultimate happiness and productivity and growth in that position, right? Eventually that's going to deplete us. And we all need those things, right? We need to be doing something that is meaningful to us with a group of people that we want to be doing it with in a way that really helps us reach for our potential. We know that about us as humans. That's who we all are. And so when you ask people to just sit back and go along with things that are really not sitting right with them, all you're doing is you're chipping away at those three things. And we don't want to chip away at that. It's a much more interesting and powerful and connecting a moment when we can have a conversation about where that disconnect might be and find a way to bridge it together.
So here's an example. Someone at the top of an organization who everybody likes. They're positive in every interaction you talk to, and yet their avoidance of conflict turns the organization into, unhealthy, cracked culture, burnout, because that person might be the nicest person in the world, but when it comes to change, it's just not his forte, and he doesn't want to, as you say, rock the boat. Is that positive?
I don't think it's positive.
Okay,
And
good.
you're giving the perfect example, right? Because it is detrimental to other people around you. So what's different about personal life and workplace is in the workplace, it has to construct together into something meaningful for the whole. We have to pay attention to the whole and not just the self. In the example that you gave, this person is prioritizing self over what's best for the whole. It feels really uncomfortable. I don't really want to do it. I'm just not that good at it. It'll all work out okay. And they're inadvertently or unintentionally or with their head in the sand, pushing that off on everybody else around them to solve for, instead of taking responsibility to be a part of that solution. And it's because we have, I think we've gotten better. I think we're seeing that in the new generations entering the workplace. Younger people are less scared of conflict conversations. But for my generation, for sure, I mean, when we grew up in school, we were told to just be nice and not create conflict. We didn't teach how to have conversation that honored disagreement. And I do think schools, colleges are doing a better job at that today and breaking through. I mean, I was just reflecting on this recently, Russell, but it has been over a half a century since we started receiving management consulting books in the marketplace that talk about these things, that talk about the importance of healthy conflict or allowing for that to happen in the workplace, about different ways of working together and showing respect to one another, and what leadership is, and that leadership is in avoidance. And yet here we are. We're still trying to move the needle forward about that.
Working with humans is messy, Rita. It's never a simple thing. I love that you even mentioned off the top of how change management is messy, and I always think, why do we need to make it messier? And I think by being that positive, embracing those experiences that are not easy for a lot of people, will only help it. But as you mentioned, there is a challenge for a lot of people. There is that switch. So, for example, if I'm a new emerging leader in an organization, or I'm making my way up in an organization and I want to be more positive, where do I start? If I'm trying to shift the needle for myself, I realize from either, 360 reviews or something, there's been enough feedback to tell me I need to make a change. What's step 1 or step 2?
Well, step one is visualizing who you want to be and what the workplace around you looks like. And you really, I want you to sit deeply in that question and really try to visualize it in your head. Who are the people around you? What is happening? What are the conversations? What is the atmosphere like? You really need to know what you want to create. And then you got to talk to yourself about, why does that matter? It's got to be compelling enough. There's got to be we only change for 2 reasons. We only change because it hurts too much to stay where we are, or because there's something that is so enticing, we are willing to go through the difficulty of change, the painfulness of change, in order to get it. So you got to create one of those 2 situations. You ought to be so miserable that you have no choice but to change, or you've got to have a vision that is so compelling to you that you really, really want to create that for yourself. And what I did in the book is I gave people, the book is 2 parts. Part 1 is what I affectionately call my manifesto. It's just everything that we've been talking about, Russell. It gives the why. Why should we care about positivity? What is toxic positivity? How do we avoid that? How do we get out of the misnomers of what positivity really isn't? And then how do we begin to act our way into this new positive culture that we want to create? And then for the acting part, in part 2, I give 50 what I call show up positive sparks. They are words that represent behaviors or mindfulness interaction where we can work on mindset around how to get more positive. And I think you start and you pick one simple thing, but I will tell you, here's my shortcut for everybody. The first thing, if nothing else, especially if you're a leader in an organization, start with recognition and gratitude. People report, we study this annually, and people annually say they are not receiving enough recognition. They want to know that they are seen and heard and understood and cared for. If you can hit those 4 things, I see you, I hear you, I care about you as a person, and I want to understand how I can better support you. If you can live in that conversation for a year, you will see extraordinary change in your people and in your results. You could just work on that for a year, I promise you. And the gratitude part is also for yourself. Making sure that you are recognizing in yourself. But I talk about this as it's a journey. It's not really a destination. You're always working on it. And it's a go slow to go fast. So it's not, there's 50 words, I'll do them in 50 days, and then I'll have positivity. Woo, woo. It doesn't work like that at all. What we want is we want to really embed a practice of positive mindset shift and positive behavior that's as consistent as we can make it, understanding that there's still going to be all the negative things that happen. By cultivating this practice, you're actually building this positive bank account for yourself and for and with others. And it's like a rainy day fund, because you're going to go through some shit storms. It is going to happen. And you're going to withdraw from that bank account. That negativity is going to take down that bank account. So the bigger the balance that you are building up in there, the better, because for each deposit that you put in, you don't get to take one negative out. It takes 3 to 5 deposits to compensate for each deduction from a negative interaction. So we got to really be crafting this in a real and true way. And then I just want to share one other really important message while we're on this topic, Russell. And that is, we really need to challenge the story that we are telling ourselves about what our job is as a leader. I think so many of the reasons that we get wrapped around the axle on these things is because we've only seen and experienced perhaps a leadership style that is still not what we know we need. And if we just keep replicating the old, we'll never get to the new. So we need to tell ourselves a story that we're pioneering, and that means we're going to make mistakes. And we're going to fail up. We're going to grow from those mistakes. And we're not always going to know the 3-year, 5-year plan. Who cares? Take it one day at a time, one step at a time. What's the next right thing? What feels right? What's the next right thing that you can do to be the leader you're visioning yourself and you're visioning for your team? And just keep moving forward one step at a time with a lot of empathy and forgiveness for yourself as you pioneer the new journey.
Oh, I like a pioneer. I love that. I want to also mention around, you talked about everybody needs encouragement. Everybody needs to hear those positives. And where I see it falling down is that leaders at a certain level think they don't have to do that anymore, because the head of an executive isn't doing that to their junior executives. They're just pointing to them and go fix the problems in the organization, without realizing those junior executives are also employees who also need that encouragement. Leaders need leaders. It doesn't stop at a certain level. But when you're saying that, I'm hearing in the back of my mind going, oh, but it's not just frontline staff. Oh, but it's not just I've seen so many people, emerging leaders at that junior executive level, being beaten down, burnt out, because they're not getting that level of positivity, of encouragement. They're just seen as tools in the organization to get that employee engagement, to improve that employee experience, when they are part of the employee experience. So
yes,
how do you turn that switch for people? Because as someone who goes into organizations and talks to clients about improving that positivity, how do you, using the metaphor we've done, flick the switch on those who may not see the value of positivity? What is that light bulb for them?
So I think that that visualization exercise that we just talked about really helps people. When I go into an organization, I have a lot of conversations. First of all, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do a deep assessment, and I'm going to talk to anybody at any level that wants to talk to me. And most people have in their mind one of two things. They either have, it's that very first question that you asked, right? They either have this experience, this amazing experience, and if I can get them tuned into what made that so amazing and what would it take to recreate that where you are right now. People have some muscle memory around that, but they long to have that back. Or they might have the other side. They might have like the thing they fled that they don't ever want back in their lives. And now it's about, so you're here to create something different. What does creating something different? Sometimes people can get into like, how do I be the antithetical to what, to what has been so painful to me. So it is a very personal thing. And I, one of the things we haven't talked about, Russell, that I think is important to say at this moment is I've really abandoned this idea that culture starts at the top of the organization. I think if you're in a really, really small company where there's just a handful of people, a dozen of you, but when you're talking about multi-levels of leaders, you don't need to wait, and you don't need to allow what is or is not happening above you to define what's possible for you and for your team. And you can just start with the people around you. And what I say to individual workers is be the coworker you wish you had. When you think about what do I want my workplace to be like every day and how do I wish people were treating me, start treating other people that way. Start showing people what that looks like. And I think for leaders, it is the same kind of thing. What do you want from your people? What kind of energy flow do you want to create in the workplace? And how can you begin to talk to your team about that and invite them to co-create with you? Because that's the other thing. There's at the end of the book, before you go into the Show Up Positive Sparks in part 2, I give 7 tips because this journey, it's not a cookie cutter. I wish I could just lay it out and say, cookie cutter, do these steps and you would be there. But one of them is this idea of put away your cape. And I think that so many times people who are in management duties start avoiding the conversations that we're talking about because they feel like if nobody says it out loud, I can just pretend it's not a problem and it's not, I don't have to deal with it. Because they have the story in their mind that they are a manager and therefore it's all their responsibility. They have to fix it. They have to have a solution and they can't go in front of their people and not have a solution because that would look really bad. Those are old management stories that are no longer true in today's workplace. And the future is in co-creating, in collaboration with your team. So you no longer need to be and hold yourself to the standard of the manager with all the answers. You need to be the manager with all the best questions.
Love that. I absolutely love that. So you're going to work. You're positive, Rita. You're doing everything you can. You're the beacon of positivity. How do you adapt through the challenges of a workplace that is making that very hard to be positive?
Well, the beacon of positivity is this. Somebody comes up to me and says, "Hey, how are you doing?" You know what? It's a really hard day. I'm struggling a bit today. Thank you for asking. I don't want to burden you with all of my issues, but it is feeling like a tough day today, and I'm working through that. You have this moment of realness. You don't hide that. You don't put the veneer on. Notice I'm not complaining about somebody. I'm not creating this downward spiraling energy of negativity. I'm just being honest. I'm struggling today. Today isn't feeling like it's going to go in the win column for me. And somebody might say, well, is there something I could do to help you? And maybe there is. Maybe it's like, well, I just have so much work that I don't even know how I'm going to get to it. And I need to be at my kid's piano recital tonight. And, well, could I take some of that work from you? They might offer something to you. You never know. And, and even if they don't, even if they say they're not the right person, can I help you? Maybe they will strike that inspiration of, you know what? I got a whole team of people around me. Maybe I need to go ask for help. Like maybe that's the positive step forward. Maybe I could go ask somebody if they would help me, right? That's showing up positive. Again, it's not that I'm smiley, that there's this veneer of sunshine that, I've crowned myself with that masking is not positivity. Transparency is positivity.
And you're never going to build that, as you mentioned earlier, that social capital if that insincerity is what people are seeing. People aren't stupid. They know when you're masking, as you've mentioned. They see it. They see right through it. Something that I've heard mentioned a lot more recently in the last couple of years is the idea of toxic positivity, where the needle goes too far, or it is that insincerity. Is it an actual problem?
I think it can be. Definitely it can be a problem. It's the unfortunate side effect of measuring a lot of things. So a lot of the data that I share with people there is scientifically factual data that shows that when you have happier employees, you have better results in your business. Full stop. unrefutable evidence of that. And so one of the leaders in this, for example, is the Gallup organization. They have their Q12, which is a survey that they can give to your population. It asks 12 questions only, and based on those 12 questions, they have scientifically proven that organizations where people are responding more positively on those 12 questions are outperforming everybody else in their category. And so, of course, then they offer consulting services when your scores are not where they need to be. And that's a good thing, but in business, sometimes we get way too fixated on moving the number, right? We lose the human element. And that's where it gets toxic when because what happens is instead of having a generative, constructive conversation with managers about, okay, how are we going to move the numbers? We start trying to turn it into some specific plan that may or may not make sense with a bunch of marching orders that we're throwing on top of a list of other demands that are creating burnout, that are sending all the wrong complex signals and not really making any difference, because instead of empowering leaders, we are just dictating a roadmap to them to try to move the needle on some metrics. Mm-hmm. Right. And so that's how I see a lot of the toxic stuff happen. It's good. It's good that we're paying attention and that we want to move those numbers. But, the first rule of medicine is first do no harm. Right. And sometimes I think we need that in business. Like, before you go all in to move those metrics, like, make sure first you're doing no harm, because, human beings have specific needs because of our humanness. We have those needs. And when we try to treat people as if they're machinery, it just doesn't work. It never works. And I feel like that's where a lot of the toxic positivity comes from. It's these forced march. A lot of times it gets hung on HR as being the culprit behind it because they're leading these employee engagement studies and metrics. But the intention is good, but the execution is faulted. Whether or not anybody's willing to say the emperor has no clothes. That's the other problem. We often that's the other toxic positivity, is when people are just not allowed to call out the problems authentically.
I find that there's too many organizations that focus so much on the employee engagement, as you've mentioned, rather than focusing on what's causing disengagement. It's much more about, can we add pizza parties? Can we do more things about engagement? Oh, our emails need to be better and more engaging. Or you could listen to your staff and, as you said, remove those things that are actually stopping them from feeling like they can speak truth to power, that they can be positive at work, because they don't feel like they can speak up. They don't feel like there is. I love that you said do no harm, because it's so applicable in that moment. So what can organizations do to demonstrate? What would you love to see organizations do to demonstrate they are open-minded, that they want positivity in the workplace? What can they actually proactively do?
Well, one of the reasons I look at the Q12 data and really appreciate that data set and those questions, and one thing I would say is, if you don't have the dollars to hire Gallup, I understand that. I'm actually in conversation with a local Louisvillian research company that's coming out with another kind of engagement tool that I'm pretty excited about, that would be a little more affordable for small and medium companies. But you can still look at those Q12 questions, because they are not about any of those surface things. I mean, when you dig into the questions are things like, in the last 6 months, somebody's talked to me about my progress or my future in the company. On a day-to-day basis, I have the tools and resources I need to do my job. Like, these are very pragmatic, practical things. Now, there are a few other things in there. There's a question that says, I have a best friend at work. It's the number one predictor of retention in the workplace, not surprisingly. And what I love about the Q12 is it's tied to these three essential things that we've learned in psychology that everybody needs in the workplace. One is they need autonomy. They need freedom around doing their job. They need the tools and resources and get out of my way and let me be the professional that I am to do my job. Now, if I'm brand new and you need to train me and onboard me to be able to do that, help me get to competence faster becomes. But once I'm there, when I change jobs, you might have to help me again to get to the competence level. Then, get out of my way. Don't micromanage me. This is why this gets to that micromanager thing. The second thing that people need is they need to contribute. They need to be doing work that matters at a capacity level that matches their aspirations. Right? So people want to make a valuable contribution every day. How are we reinforcing? That's that recognition to people every day. You're doing something valuable that matters, that is being seen and is making a difference. A simple example, I think it's a Toyota manufacturing on the car assembly line. They have a goal, and the goal is at the end of the assembly plant. There's a number, and they count down the cars that go out the line. And the goal for that whole unit, everybody working the line at that shift, is to get their number of cars out the door. But of course, they don't want to sacrifice quality. Any team member there can stop the production line if there's a quality issue or something that needs to be fixed. There's a problem, but they also then have this shared goal that they're tracking. They know, so they can see, like, we're going to make our number, or, hey, we're kind of behind the ball here a little bit. What's going on? Is this legitimate, or should we be performing differently? It allows a conversation. So contribution, you got to have autonomy, freedom to do your work. You got to have contribution that's meaningful and matters and is valued. And then you have to have relationship and belonging. And that is the first thing that you can do for anybody coming in the door. That's why onboarding is so important. You can't, it's like when your kids, go off to school for the first day or whatever. You can't help them make friends. They got to do that on their own in their own time. But are the conditions present in your workplace? Are you creating an environment that allows people to really get to know one another and create connection? So one of the first things when you start to see performance decline in a team, we often look at all kinds of metrics and things. The number one thing I would recommend that you look at is look at the relationships in the team. Are people, are people still in a good place around their belonging? And so what I love about the Q12 is it hits all three of those factors in a very pragmatic way. And that question about, you don't have to have a best friend. If you do, you're likely to stay longer and feel more positive about the company that you're in. But it gets to this idea of belonging. And we are recognizing, and of course, we're talking about it in diversity and inclusion, this importance of belonging in the workplace. And it's a foundational place. When I do culture repair work, belonging is one of the first places that we're going to focus time and attention for that reason.
Of course, I smirk every time I hear the word relationships just based on the name of the podcast. So I'm like, oh, she's hitting those keywords perfectly. Thank you, Rita.
You're welcome.
So I have to wrap up the podcast, this beautiful conversation, with the question I always ask, which is, what's one simple action people can do right now to improve those relationships at work? Speaking of relationships.
I think that the simplest thing that you can do is make a commitment to yourself for 1 week to catch people around you at work doing good things. It might be helping out a colleague. It might just be the way they're delivering their job. It might just be telling the joke that gets everybody laughing, that lightens them, whatever. Just catch people bringing good into your workplace and acknowledge it in some way. Now, my favorite thing is to write a note. And if you're having a really bad day, one of the best things that you can do is go find yourself 3 minutes of quiet with a piece of paper or a Post-it note and write 2 or 3 notes of gratitude and appreciation to people around you at work, and then go deliver them. You will get this release, this positive release in your heart and soul. Trust me, everybody that does this activity with me says it. It will fill your cup instantaneously with those positive deposits just to write it. And then when you go deliver it, you're going to share that. You're going to put positive deposits in somebody else's cup. And so that's my best advice. Just start there. Just start catching people doing something that is good and helpful at work and taking a moment to acknowledge it verbally or in writing.
That's some damn good advice by Rita Ernst. She's an organizational effectiveness consultant and the author of Show Up Positive. Thank you so much for being here, Rita.
Thanks for having me, Russell. I've loved every moment of this conversation.
And that'll do it for another episode of Relationships at Work. I'm Russell. Thanks again for joining. If you have a moment and you want to see what the guests look like, their smiling faces, their animated hands, check out Relationships at Work on YouTube and listen to a couple. I've got about 10 episodes dropped. We just recently launched. So I'm releasing a new episode every Friday, and they're the best of the episodes that we've had over the last year and a half. And you also get to see quite a bit of animated responses. We're all very passionate about this subject. So head on over to our YouTube channel, like and subscribe, and I hope you enjoy this other little more animated format of the show. Take care.